QSO Today, episode 257, Ray Heffer, G4NSJ. This episode of QSO Today is sponsored by ICOM America, makers of the finest HF, VHF, and UHF transceivers and accessories for the radio amateur, reminding you that they have just the right rig for contesters, DXers, and rag chewers. And by QRP Labs, my friend Hans Sommer, G0UPL's radio kit company, makers of the popular QCX kit transceiver. My thanks to ICOM America and QRP Labs for sponsoring the QSO Today podcast. My thanks to all of you listeners who also make donations, pay for transcriptions, and subscribe to sponsorships and to my weekly email list. As I enter my 5th year of producing the QSO Today podcast, I couldn't do it without you. Welcome to the QSO Today podcast. I'm Eric Guth, 4Z1UG, your host. My QSO today is with Ray Heffer, G4NSJ, who commandeered the family shortwave radio as a kid to further his interest in shortwave radio listening and ultimately amateur radio. Ray has made his career as a television, radio, and audiovisual equipment repairman and now specializes in the repair and restoration of 1940s vintage AM radio sets. I found this endeavor to be fascinating, and I know that you too will enjoy this QSO with G4NSJ. G4NSJ, this is Eric, 4Z1UG. Are you there, Ray?
4Z1UG, G4NSJ. Yes, hello, Eric, loud and clear.
Ray, thanks for joining me on the QSO Today podcast. Can we start at the beginning of your ham radio story? When and how did it start for you?
Right. A long time ago, I was 10 years old, roughly 10 years old. Sitting in the lounge one evening, my parents had this big old wooden valve radio on the sideboard, and my father was tuning around. Now, bear in mind, I'd only ever heard the BBC Home Service, which he listened to, BBC Radio 3, which was the classical station my grandfather listened to, and the BBC Light programme, which my mother liked. And my father was tuning around, and he said, "Oh, there's America." My ears pricked up. America? What's this? And I went over and had a look, and he said, "It's shortwave." And he showed me tuning around. He heard all these stations from all around the world, which I thought fantastic. So once he'd finished, I sat there and I tuned around. And basically from that night onwards, I commandeered the radio.
You were the one who controlled the programming for your entire family.
Yes, indeed. And
how did that go?
Well, they got fed up with it. Every night I'm there making all these whistling noises and foreign languages coming through. They were trying to watch TV or they wanted to listen to something on the radio. So luckily a family friend heard about all this and gave me another shortwave radio with several shortwave bands. It was long, medium, but several shortwave bands. So I installed that in my bedroom. And I started listening to the amateur bands. Now, this is where it really started, because I would listen to what were then the old boys talking about aerials, transmitters, receivers. I'm now the old boy, of course. But I used to make notes. I'd hear them talking about a dipole for 80 meters and coax and open line feeders. I'd write it all down. So I made my own dipole. I'm not sure what length it was now, but it worked extremely well on this old radio. I then, at the age of 12, I got fed up with that. I'd heard about communications receivers. So I went about getting one of those, which my father helped me with. And of course, then I was really on the road to amateur radio because I could hear, what could I hear? The trawler band. What was that, 1.6 to 3 point something megs, all the ships out in the English Channel, the Coast Guard stations, all on AM, of course, and Morse, of course, CW. And it was absolutely fantastic. I could hear military operations on Salisbury Plain, soldiers in tanks, driving around on Salisbury Plain in their tanks, talking to each other. And of course, it was just absolutely fantastic. I'll never forget those days, especially the old boys. This is where I learned all the stuff initially. The old boys on the amateur bands talking about how to do it all, how to put aerials up, how to build transmitters. And that's basically how it all started, Eric.
Now, okay, so you're listening to amateur radio operators. Did you know that there might be an amateur radio club in your town, or that there might be somebody that could serve as a mentor to you in order to get you to the next point, and that is to get your license?
Yes, I didn't know at that time there was an amateur radio club. I did join a club. I forget how old I was. I did join the local club, and I learned a lot from the old boys there. Of course, again, things were very different then. All the older people, all the older amateurs, they knew what they were talking about. I'm not saying the ones today don't, but they had the experience, years of experience. They built receivers, they built transmitters, they'd done all this stuff, and they knew what they were doing. So they were really great people to get to know. I fell out of favour with the local club slightly, only slightly, when I actually got to go to work. I was 15 when I got my first job, which was a apprentice radio and TV engineer. And there were a couple of radio amateurs in the workshop, but there are also a couple of what were known as pirates, not music pirates, but they would transmit to each other and others all around the country on shortwave, 6.6 megs. So I started to listen to them as well as the amateurs. And I actually built with their help my first transmitter, which was 10 watts, anode and screen modulation, or plate and screen. Just a very small thing, crystal controlled. I managed to get a crystal because here in Worthing, we had a army surplus shop. You name it, they had it. Crystals, big tuning capacitors for ATUs, military gear. They had absolutely everything. So I built this transmitter, and I gave a call out one Sunday morning, and a chap answered me from 200 miles away in Wales. And he said, really nice modulation. I couldn't believe it. That was my first contact, although it was illegal. That was my first ever contact on the air. And of course, I was already hooked, but I was hooked even more then. And of course, the local radio club knew about this. And they said, look, why don't you get your license? You can do all this legally. You're obviously keen, which I was. So I did. I took the RAE, as it was, the Radio Amateurs Examination, and I got my Class B license, which allowed me to go on to 2 meters. That's where the actual license part of it started.
And how old were you when you got the license? And I think I remember that maybe in those days there was even an age restriction, right, for the amateur radio license.
Yes, I believe it was 14. I was about 17 at this stage, because I'd been, I was already, although illegally, I was already on the air. I was doing everything that amateurs were doing, but sort of without the license. So it wasn't until I would have taken the license earlier. I think, afterwards I thought, well, I should have done this at 14. But I was actually 17 when I got the Class B, and I was let loose on 2 meters, which was AM then. Would you believe? I had a Heathkit tour, which was a little valve Heathkit job, crystal controlled transmitter, AM, and I forget what the receiver was, some sort of TRF tunable thing. And that was it. I was on 2 meters.
Now, did you have to take the code test for this license?
Yes. 2 meters was great fun. I got my 4-element beam up and on a pole, which I rotated by hand. It was great fun, but there was this shortwave was calling me, the HF bands were calling me. 2 meters was great, but I wanted to speak to people hundreds, if not thousands of miles away. And VHF just didn't do it for me. It was great for a local chat, making new friends, meeting people. So a friend of mine was a radio officer in the Merchant Navy. And he said, look, why don't you take the Morse exam? He said, if you carry on pirating, you'll lose your Class B license anyway. He said, take the Morse and get your full license. So he helped me. He was sending and receiving CW for a living, basically, on the ships. So he was pretty good at Morse, about 35 words a minute, which I found incredible. So yes, he and another friend taught me Morse. It took me 3 months from scratch. I was quite pleased with that. And I went up to North Foreland, the Coast Guard station, call sign GNF, North Foreland. And I passed the Morse exam. That was a fantastic day. Apart from passing the exam, the radio officer that did the exam, he said to me afterwards, very professional. Now, I never forget those words, very professional. That made my day, I think, more than just passing the exam. And I was shown around the station. And I'll never forget this chap was sitting there on 500 kcs, because 500 kcs in those days was long wave, isn't it? It's incredible. Right. That was one of the main shipping frequencies. He was bashing out Morse on this key. And I looked at him and I thought, I can do that now, albeit a lot slower. But I don't know, I was just so pleased with myself. That was a fantastic day.
Well, that sounds amazing. Now, you were still in high school in those days, right? When you got your first license? No, where was I? 17? No, because I started work at 15. Oh, I see. Okay.
Yeah. I left school when I was 14. I went and fell off my bicycle and ruptured my liver. So I ended up in hospital for a long time. And the way I saw it at the time, that was a bit of luck because I didn't have to go back to school. I could go and start mending TVs and radios instead, which seemed like more fun.
Now, I saw that you belonged or you went to a guild for training. How did that work? Because from what you say on your website.
Yes. Yes, City and Guilds. That's radio and TV servicing. Basically what it was, as an apprentice, it was a 5-year apprenticeship. And you had day release, so one full day at college and one evening at college for 5 years. And that was radio and TV servicing. There was practical theory. And I must admit, it was, I passed the exam in the end, of course, but that's not where I learned about radios and repairing televisions. I learned everything from the workshop, from the old boys in the workshop.
From the apprenticeship?
Yes, during the apprenticeship. In the actual TV workshop, I was just one of the lads, and I'd get a TV on the bench. Whether I could repair it or not, they'd give me a TV, take the back off, take the chassis out, and then someone would come over and have a look. And they'd say, right, you've got a straight line across the screen. That's frame claps. Okay, frame claps. And they'd go through it with me. So I learnt more from the other engineers in the workshop than I actually did at college. But of course, I had to go to college to do the City and Guilds exam at the end of it all.
Are apprenticeships still the norm in the UK?
I don't think so, Eric. No, I think they're trying to bring them back in because in those days, when I was in my teens in the 60s, very few people went to university or any kind of further education. Everyone left school. The school leaving age was 16 and you go out to work. I think some people stayed on. If you went to what they called sixth form college, you stayed on till 18. But the majority of people like myself left at 16. I left a year earlier because I ended up in hospital. But I think they're trying to bring apprenticeships back. It worked well in those days. In my situation, for example, I was paid a terribly low wage every week, but I was going to college for a whole day and one evening, and I was learning. So the company I worked for were making use out of me. I was doing things in the workshop. I was helping with things, and I ended up, of course, repairing things without any help. And I wasn't costing them a great deal. So it worked extremely well.
Well, it sounds to me like nowadays there's probably thousands of jobs where apprenticeships are the best way to learn.
I think so. Just off topic, as they say, dreadful expression, but just for a second, nurses used to go to a nurse-type teaching hospital. They call them teaching hospitals. So a trainee nurse, at 16 years old, would go there, and you have, similar to what I did, you'd have sort of days of theory, then you're on the wards, doing the practical things. Whereas now, nurses go to university. They don't go anywhere near a hospital.
I guess nowadays, with nursing shortages across the world, nurses are coming from the Far East, just because there seems to be not enough of them in the West, that is.
Yes. It's all. I mean, I often moan and think people say, "Oh, well, you're just an old fool." But I like the old days. I like it the way things were. I think that's why I like radio as it was. I like CW contacts. I like AM as a form of modulation. I mean, I use sideband now, obviously, but I've tried some of the other modes. I've tried slow scan TV. That was fun. RTTY, PSK31. I've done various digital things, but I always come back to Morse code, and if anyone's willing, then AM contacts. I'm just old-fashioned, I think.
And now this message from ICOM America. Heard it, worked it, logged it. Now that field day has passed, we enter the contest season and hopefully more time to get on the air. It's time to get the ICOM transceiver that's best suited for your lifestyle. ICOM offers a variety of high-performance and innovative products. Make the most of the summer and contest season with one of these great ICOM rigs. The IC7610 is the SDR every ham wants, and just in time for contest season. This high-performance SDR has the ability to pick out the faintest of signals even in the presence of stronger adjacent signals. The new ICOM IC7610 is a direct sampling software-defined radio, SDR, that will change the world's definition of an SDR transceiver. The ICOM 7610 features include RF direct sampling system, 110 dB RMDR, independent dual receivers, and dual digicell. The IC7300 has changed the way an entry-level HF transceiver is designed. The rig is a high-performance, innovative HF transceiver with a compact design that will far exceed your expectations. I purchased one myself last fall and can tell you that the ICOM 7300 is as good or better than any rig I've ever had. The ICOM IC7300 includes RF direct sampling, 15 discrete bandpass filters, a large 4.3-inch color touchscreen, real-time spectrum scope, internal antenna tuner, and an SD card memory slot. No matter which ICOM rig you choose, you'll be a winner. Be sure to check out these fine rigs at www.icomamerica.com or click on the banner on the QSO Today show notes page. And when you finally go to make your ICOM purchase, be sure to tell the dealer that you heard about it here on QSO Today. My thanks to ICOM America for sponsoring the QSO Today podcast. And now back to our QSO. On your website, you describe yourself as an anorak. Do you want to define an anorak for the audience?
An anorak, that's a kind of UK thing. An anorak, it's a bit like nerd. An anorak is someone that, what do they do? Well, I'll take me in my teens. Okay, I lived, breathed, and slept radio. That's all I did. So that's an anorak. And very often in those days, people wore these jackets. They were known as anoraks. And these people always seem to wear this anorak jacket. There'd be a copy of Practical Wireless sticking out of one pocket and Shortwave magazine in the other pocket. And that's all they did, sort of eat, breathe and sleep and live radio or electronics.
My guess is that the majority of listeners to the QSO Today podcast might describe themselves as anoraks when they were teenagers as well. I certainly could.
Yes, indeed. Yes.
What was the rig that you put together during this period of time?
Well, the homemade transmitter.
You now have your amateur radio license. You now have all of the privileges from DC to blue light.
Yes.
What kind of rig did you put together in those days to be able to take advantage of this new license?
Yeah, in those days, well, I bought the day I got my G4 license, I had to wait for it to come in the post, and I bought ready for this big day a Yaesu FT101B. Some people might remember those. And I had it all ready and all set up to go. And, of course, every day I'm waiting for the postman. And when it turned up, my license, I took a day off work, and I spent the whole day on 80 meters on this Yaesu FT101. And I remember the first chap I spoke to, I said, "You're my first HF contact. I got my license this morning." And I think I was getting a bit boring on 80 because someone commented. He said to me, "I've been listening to you all morning. You're now saying you're my 15th contact." So it was, we had a bit of fun with that. But it was the Yaesu. I also used, I don't know whether you know of the 19 set.
Well, I've had some guests in the past who've had the 19 set.
Yes, they cover. Basically, they were used in tanks in the 1940s. They were used in tanks, and it covers 2 to 8 megs. So you've got 3 amateur bands there. You could just squeeze top band into it, 80 and 40 meters, AM only, of course. And I had several of those which I used on the amateur bands, as well as 18 sets. People will know those. 52 sets, all sorts. 22, 62. I had loads of ex-military valve equipment, which was all very easy to get going on the amateur bands. But I had the Yaesu FT101B for many, many years. It was I wish I'd never sold it, actually. It was a well-made, very reliable radio.
What's the current rig?
It's a Kenwood. What is it? FT, not FT. The TS570D, that's it. Yeah, the Kenwood TS570D, which is very nice. It's got the large readout, which is good for old people like me with not very good eyesight. It's got a built-in iambic keyer, the electronic keyer, which is nice. I'm only just getting back into CW, so I don't want anyone asking me for contacts yet. Yeah, it's a Kenwood, and I've got a... what is it? What's the ATU? It's a Capco, which I found locally. It's a Capco. I've never heard of them before till I saw this. It's quite a nice thing. It covers top band right the way through to 10 meters.
So that antenna tuner?
Yes, yeah. It's got a huge roller coaster in it and 2 massive variable capacitors. It's really nice bit of gear. Yeah, made by Capco. I'd never heard of them before I got hold of this one.
Wow, that's amazing. And when you say roller coaster, you're referring to a rolling inductor.
That's right. Yes, of course, yes. Is that a sort of UK term, roller coaster?
Well, a roller coaster in my mind is something that you get in that makes you nauseous and...
Yes.
The kids loved it, but I was never a roller coaster fan. But a roller inductor is how we refer to the... to what you used to find, say, in the Johnson Matchbox.
The Johnson. Yes, a friend of mine had one of those. I was most envious.
Yeah, it seemed you could match anything with the Johnson Matchbox, as I recall.
Yeah, that's right. I hear a lot of people these days, some of the newcomers on the bands, and they'll say, the SWR, it's 1.5. I can't get it any lower. The aerial's no good. It's not the aerial, it's the ATU. Or to be what it should be called is an aerial matching unit, isn't it?
Right.
It's not it doesn't tune the aerial; it matches the aerial. But a lot of them I hear say, "Oh, it's 1.5 to 1. I can't get it any lower." And I said to them, a proper aerial matching unit will match anything from like 200 feet of wire to a 6-inch nail. If it's a decent unit. And SWR, I think a lot of people get confused with what SWR is. You can stick coax in a bucket of water and load that up and get 1-to-1 SWR, but that doesn't make it a decent aerial.
It sure doesn't. And your matchbox or your ATU unit is dispersing all the heat that's coming from the power of your transmitter.
Indeed, yes, that's it.
So a good reason to run QRP. Maybe.
QRP, yes. I do like that. My radio will only run 100 watts anyway. Unlike a lot of American stations, which I'd love to have a go at. I haven't got kilowatts.
What's the antenna that you're using with the Capco antenna tuner?
It's what you probably call it the same thing, a doublet. It's basically a dipole fed with 300 ohm ribbon, or 450 ohm or 600 open line, whatever. But we call it a doublet.
Right. Well, that's what I was telling you yesterday that I put up in
Oh, that's
the back
right.
of my house. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of cool. The antenna tuner seems to match it really fast. So on all
Yes.
bands. So that's kind of cool.
Yeah, it's a really nice aerial because, of course, it will work anywhere from, you can use it anywhere from the frequency it's cut for up to, well, a friend of mine uses his on 6 meters quite successfully. I think his doublet's about 100 feet long and he uses it on 6 meters. So, it will work all over the place. It's really nice aerial.
Right. What's interesting about the doublet, and what I'm learning about the antenna is that mine's 100 feet long. I've got it as an inverted V, but my lot is not large enough, to extend it straight out. So I actually have it kind of doubling back, kind of like a saw blade in two places, and it still seems to work.
Yes.
Anything out there seems to work.
Yeah, that's right. I've only got 100 feet from the very front of the property to the back fence is 100 feet. Now, my doublet is 130. The reason it's 130 is it's because 80 meters is 132, isn't it, half wave? Right. So I've added just 15 feet. Actually, I think I've got 132 now. I've added 15 or 16 feet each end, which then go off at an angle and droop down a bit. So overall, it's 132 feet. And it doesn't seem to, the ends of any sort of dipole type aerial don't radiate a lot anyway. As you know, the current is in the middle. At the end is all voltage, so it doesn't matter if they hang down somewhere, as long as people don't touch them if you're running a few kilowatts.
I put some 10-foot poles up so that the wires are not low enough that somebody will get either decapitated on the wires walking around the backyard or touch the wires if I happen to be transmitting at the time.
Yes.
One of the things that caught my attention and the reason that I contacted you, Ray, is that you have a great website called the Radio Workshop. I'll put a link to that in the show notes page.
Right.
On it, you restore old radios. What kind of old radios do you restore, and how did you get started doing that?
That comes really from my apprenticeship days in the radio and TV workshop. I was working on these radios as well as televisions, tape recorders, record players. These old radios, I was working on those as well. And I've always been involved with radios. And the local, used to have a lot of local radio and TV shops. You could go in and take your old radio or your telly. They'd sell you a valve if you wanted one. But they've all gone now. I don't think there are any radio and TV repair shops around anymore, as far as I know. So if someone's got, as a lot of people have, they look up in the attic and they'll find an old radio. Oh, that's the one my grandmother had, or that was my grandfather's. I remember that when I was a child, and they want to get it going again. So basically what they do is bring it to me. I've been doing that kind of forever, I suppose. Started, as I said, when I got my first job at 15, and I'm now 68, and I'm still mending old radios.
And when you're saying old radios, you're talking about, first AM radios and then AM FM radios, right? That came later in, say, the 60s and 70s. Yeah,
I only stick to 1940s radios.
Is that right?
Yeah.
So that's your criteria, is that you like 1940s radios?
Yes, it's not so much. The reason is that they're easy to work on, of course, because they're just long wave, medium wave, and short wave. The later ones with VHF, FM, they've got a little bit more. They have problems because they only go up to 100 megs, and our FM band here is 108. And between 100 and 108, that's where most of the local radio stations are. And these radios won't do that. They don't seem to be so collectible, the ones with FM, because they're 50s and 60s. It seems what it was. So I was having so many 1940s radios brought to me that I thought, well, I can't take on any more work. So I narrowed it down, 1940s radios only, and that keeps me very busy.
Well, that's pretty amazing. And you say when you say that it keeps you very busy, how many radios do you think you get a week that you're restoring of 1940s radios?
Probably 3. I'd say 3 to 4, say average of 3. and each one can take, well, what I try to do is allow a day for a radio. It very often goes into a day and a half, because when I started repairing these in the old days, a radio would come in and it's got a fault. It's humming. So the smoothing capacitors had gone or whatever, or it was dead. One of the valves, series heaters on the valves, one of them was open circuit, replace a valve. These days, if a radio comes in to me, it doesn't just want a fault repairing. It's got all the old capacitors that need replacing. The mains lead is usually lethal, so I have to replace that. The alignment's out. The tuning mechanism is probably seized up, or the cord has broken. There are so many. Basically, it has to have a sort of complete overhaul, unlike the old days where I would repair one fault.
Let me take a quick break here to tell you about my favorite amateur radio audio podcast, the Ham Radio Workbench Podcast with George, KG6VU, and Jeremy, KF7IJZ, where they pursue topics, technology, and projects on their ham radio workbenches every 2 weeks. George and Jeremy document their projects and make circuit boards available for sale to their listeners. They have interesting guests and go in deep. Even if you're a seasoned ham radio builder or just getting started, be sure to join George and Jeremy for the Ham Radio Workbench podcast. Use the link on this week's show notes page by clicking on the image. And now back to our QSO today. First of all, I find it's astounding that you see 3 1940 radios a week, which means you may be the only guy in the UK that's doing this, and people are coming from one end of the British Isles to the other to bring radios to you?
Indeed, yes, indeed. I believe there are 3 of us doing this in the UK. I have also had, you might find this difficult to believe as well, I've had radios sent to me from France, from Cyprus. I used to do quite a few for a chap in Cyprus. I think what happened there was a lot of British radios were sent out to Cyprus in, I don't know when, the 50s, perhaps. I don't know when it was. So a lot ended up out there. The Republic of Ireland, a lot of radio manufacturers here, like Bush, for example, HMV, they did export models for the Republic of Ireland. Now, the export models didn't have long wave, but they had short wave and medium wave. Medium wave, of course, for the American listeners is AM, what they call AM. We call it medium wave. So I get a lot of radios from the Irish Republic, as I say, as well as France. I've had them from Spain, Italy, all over the place. I mean, mainly, though, the UK. People post them from all over the UK to me.
My guess is that you could probably say, what does a restoration cost? If somebody comes to you with a radio, are they ready to hand out some serious pounds in order to have this radio in working condition?
Yes, it's very much difficult to put a figure on it. It can be anything from £50, if it really is just a basic fault. Because some of these radios have been restored in the past, by whoever. It might have been done 15 years ago by someone, and it's now just developed a fault. That doesn't happen very often. If it needs a complete overhaul, then it can be, it could be £200 or more. It just depends how far they want to go. I used to, up until a few years ago, I would strip the wooden cabinets, take the veneer off and re-veneer them. And that was time consuming. I stopped doing that in the end because I just, I was all week on one radio, re-veneering it, restoring the chassis, and I couldn't do it. I just didn't have the time. So, and of course that was expensive because veneering, staining and polishing, that all took a long time.
Now, do you have business partners in the area that can do some of that work that you could subcontract, the cases and that veneering to somebody else? Or is it just you're at a point now where you just don't do it?
Unfortunately, I just don't do it. I have in the past tried to find local people to help me, but to be honest, no one's interested. I've even tried not to get an apprentice because I just work on my own, but I've even tried to find perhaps a youngster that might be interested, that wants to perhaps learn the trade, but no one's interested. So a lot of my customers have said to me, "What happens when you go? What do we do then?" All I can say is I've recorded a lot of videos for YouTube, so when I'm gone, hopefully that will be my legacy. Hopefully people, I don't know, they'll look at those in years to come and possibly even learn from them and start restoring them again. I really don't know what's going to happen.
Now, has the UK halted broadcasting on medium wave?
No, not yet. We've got about 5 medium wave stations, 5 main ones, and then there are several little ones around the country, like local community type things. Long wave, I don't think you've got, there's not long wave in America, is there? And other parts.
I mean, not as a commercial, I think the AM and FM, so we're talking about the, 560 to 1000 is the AM band, and 108 to whatever, or was it 90
to
88 to like 108 is the FM band, yeah.
That's it. Yes, so we've got long wave, and BBC Radio 4 is on 200 kilohertz. So we've got that. That's going strong. In fact, in Ireland, in the Irish Republic, they've got RTE, which is Radio Television Air, which is on 252 kilohertz. You can probably hear these around the world.
Why do you think they're going strong? It seems to me what I hear is that countries want to shut down these commercial broadcast stations because they're expensive, and then just deliver all of their content over cellular telephone networks.
Yes, yeah. There's been a big debate going on for several years about DAB radio.
Right.
They want to close down all medium wave, long wave, and even VHF, band 2 FM. They want to close all that down and just have DAB. There's been a huge backlash because a lot of the sort of audiophiles, as they're called, the people that are really into hi-fi, they don't want their FM band taken away from them because DAB isn't as good audio quality. I don't know a lot about DAB, but it's not as good as FM. It's to do with bit rates and all that sort of thing, isn't it? But so our government, I think, have finally said, "Oh, okay, well, we'll keep the FM stations going, but the AM stations are slowly, one by one, disappearing," which is a great shame. We lost our local one in Brighton, which is about 10 miles away from me. That disappeared last year, and they're now only on they're on FM and DAB and the internet, of course. So yes, we'll end up with nothing on AM at all here, and I suppose one day FM will also disappear.
That would be the end of these vintage radios. Although you have a unique solution to vintage radios when those disappear, don't you? You want to mention that? Yes. Quite a few customers will say, "Look, if I go ahead and spend this money and get this radio done, what happens when there's the big switch off and it no longer picks up any stations, perhaps apart from a few French or other ones?" And that's not a problem. There are several ways of doing it. There's a little AM transmitter, which is quite inexpensive, and all you do is you put 12 volts little power supply into that, and you put some audio into it from your DAB or whatever radio or computer, tape recorder, whatever you want, bit of audio in there. And there's a little frequency set up inside, so you can choose where you are on the AM band, and it transmits locally. When I say locally, all around your house, and if you're lucky, out into the garden. So you can tune, because some people will have several of these old radios that they've collected, so they can tune all these old radios into what is essentially their own radio station. So that's one way around the problem. Oh, that's very clever. And then you do something else with Bluetooth, don't you? Yes. I was. Yes, a lot of people don't like this. I will only add Bluetooth to a radio if it is absolutely beyond redemption, if it's finished. I made a video a little while ago, actually, when is a radio scrap? Because a lot of people say, no, a vintage radio is never scrap. You can strip the chassis, you can de-rust it, you can chromium plate it, you can build it all back together again. But yes, that is true, but
I dread to think the time and the cost involved. So someone that's perhaps had a radio, they've got a radio, they remember it in the 40s, it was their grandmother's or whatever, it was a wedding present, is now beyond repair, or beyond economical repair. So what I do is fit a little solid state amplifier. I wire up the original volume. Well, I put my own volume control in. It's a different value. I don't dismantle the radio at all. I remove the original volume control and just leave it in the chassis, still connected. I fit the volume control. I'll put LED lights in where the dial lights are. I found some really warm white, nice sort of glowing lights. They look original. Use the original speaker, the Bluetooth board, a power supply, and when you look and listen to the radio, you wouldn't know that it's Bluetooth. You wouldn't know that it's not an original valve radio. So that gives their family heirloom a new lease of life. Rather than sit on the side just looking dull and quiet, it lights up and they can play their music through it.
Right, from their smartphone.
Yes, a smartphone, iPad, whatever.
Very clever, very clever. Are you buying old radios? Do you go out and look through sales and to see if you can find old radios to resell, to fix up and resell?
I used to, but again, I ended up, I just didn't have time because I'm doing the customers radios. I don't have time to sort of buy my own. And I used to, though. I used to recondition them all, do the cabinets and then sell them on my website, which was quite successful. But I just don't have the time now, unfortunately. I think a lot of people don't realise when they look at the website, they seem to think it's some sort of big organisation. And I've got lots of engineers and woodworking people around, but it's just me. And I can't do everything. This is as much as I'd love to. I recently stopped record player repairs. That was only, 3 or 4 years ago. I was getting, because vinyl is coming back in, I'm getting more and more record player inquiries. And I just don't have the time. I'd love to, but I can't do everything. That's the trouble.
Now, you mentioned that you don't like to work on radios made by Philips. What did Philips do that was different than the radios that came from, say, Brush and HMV?
Ah, right. Yes, you have been reading my website, haven't you? Right. No disrespect to Philips, the company, but back in the 40s, Philips, they made beautiful radios. They sound very nice. They look lovely. But take, for example, an ordinary British radio, HMV, Bush, Marconi, any of that lot. The tuning mechanism is a cord, like a nylon or whatever cord, goes round some pulleys, turns the tuning capacitor from the spindle on the front, and the pointer moves up and down. Philips, in their wisdom, they use Bowden cables, Bowden cables like bicycle brake cables. And if the inner of the Bowden cable goes wrong, if it breaks, there's very little you can do about it. You can try and find a bit of perhaps very thin piano wire to replace it, but it's a nightmare. They have gearboxes. The wave change switch won't be an ordinary wafer. The shaft coming out of the front, if you look on the back, there will be a beveled gear, which works another gear on another shaft, which goes to the other end of the radio, which then works a pivot, which then operates some sort of strange wave change switch. It's the mechanics in Philips, the old radios, are absolutely incredible. And the tape recorders, I remember from the 60s, you take the top off the actual tape recorder, look at the mechanism, absolutely full of mechanics, levers, pivots, adjustments. I had a radio to look at the other day. This was for a friend. And the wave change switch was a rack and pinion. Now, that's great on your car for the steering, rack and pinion steering, but not in a vintage radio, for goodness sake. They were just hugely over-engineered and overly complicated. And a lot of the components, this friend of mine wanted the volume control replaced. He took the chassis out. I thought, fair enough, I'll do that for him. The volume control, not the ordinary type of pot with the center nut. No, it had some weird fixing, not 3 connections on the pot as usual. It had 4. I just said I'm not touching it. I can't do it. I could have possibly rearranged the circuit to take a 3-connection pot. The fourth one, I believe, was something to do with tone correction as you turn the volume up. Again, hugely overcomplicated for what is basically just an AM radio, you know. Yeah, and lots of other reasons. I just don't work on Philips, I'm afraid, Eric.
And now this message from QRP Labs. Hans Summers, G4NSJ, the ham behind QRP Labs, has created a wide range of radios and radio accessories to make your kit building fun and successful. Hans created the ultimate Arduino Shield kit that allows you to install this board on an Arduino board, header pins to header socket. With the addition of the SI5351 synthesizer, GPS receiver board, and a low-pass filter, you have a fully automated WhisperNet transmitter. With QRP Labs kits and accessories, there's no stopping the ham that wants to continue to add features, bands, and system capability. What a better way to build a great rig over time on a limited budget and become a master of what's under the lid. For the hands-on learner, this is the best way to become an expert. Be sure to use the links on the show notes pages to get to QRP Labs to tell Hans that you heard it here on QSO Today. QRP Labs is my favorite kit company. It should be yours too. And now back to QSO Today. When we spoke yesterday, you told me that you have a YouTube channel, and you actually mentioned it a couple of times already in our conversation today. What is the subject of the YouTube channel, and how did you get it started?
Yeah, that's interesting. Many years ago, a friend of mine said, no, sorry, not a friend, it was a customer actually. He rang me and he said, I'm trying to repair this radio and I've got this problem. I explained to him, I said, hang on, this is too complicated to explain over the phone or by email. I said, what I'll do a video for you and I'll email you the video. And I did that. I just made a quick video, showed him, I had a chassis on the bench at the time. I showed him what was what. I said, yeah, that's the smoothing capacitor there in that sort of aluminium tin can. And anyway, he got back to me and he said, that was so helpful. I repaired the radio, you know, and I thought, this is an idea, because I was asked quite a lot, is there any way I could repair a radio myself? I'm good with the soldering iron. I can use tools. I've got basic electrical knowledge. So I started doing the videos. And that's where it all took off from there. And I've got a members area on the website, and I do a weekly video, and I'm now on week 322. So that's quite a few weeks. It's just over 6 years.
Oh, that's amazing. Without fail, you make a video.
Yeah, every week, without fail, every Monday. I've never missed a Monday. I think one or two have only been 10 minutes long. They're normally 20 minutes to half an hour. But I've never missed a Monday, not yet anyway. And
what's the subject? Besides, is it just radio repair, or do you use it as a mouthpiece for other kinds of communication?
It is. It's restoring vintage valve radios. That's all it's for. I've recently started to venture into amateur radio because quite a few of the people that are restoring these radios, they either are radio amateurs or they want to become radio amateurs, or hams as they're called, of course. So I started to make a few videos about amateur radio, perhaps to try and encourage new people to become amateurs, get their license, or entice people back into the hobby even.
I noticed that you appear to have an interest in solar weather. What kind of interest do you have in solar weather, and where are you posting? Oh, yes, that's basically to do with the sunspot cycle for 10 meters. I don't follow it that much, but I've now gone over to the 10 meter band because my favorite bands are 160 and 80. But the noise level on those, where I am at my QTH, the noise level, on top band, you're looking at S9 plus 20 most of the time. And it's impossible to have any contacts with that sort of noise. So I'm now looking at 10 meters, which is a lovely band. You've got the repeaters in Europe and America, of course. We're at the worst part of the sunspot cycle at the moment. But even now, there are little openings. I spoke to a chap in Russia the other day, a lady in Switzerland I spoke to on 10. And of course, there's FM, there's the repeaters, there's slow scan TV, there are beacons,
all over the world for 10 meters. A friend of mine is a non-directional beacon DXer. He spends his life listening to beacons and getting QSL cards from them. So that's it. 10 meters is where I am now.
And what's your favorite operating mode on 10 meters?
I can't tell a lie. At the moment, it's just single sideband. I'm trying to get into CW again. It's been many years. I've had a few contacts recently, but it was many years before I'd used CW. I'm getting back up to speed. I'm mainly listening, but I have had a few contacts. So that will be my favorite mode. But at the moment, it's still sideband because, it's going to take me a few more months to get really up to speed. I think I'm approaching about 15 words a minute, but I'd like to get a little bit more than that.
Can we go back to radio restoration? Because it just occurred to me, if you're restoring radios from the 1940s, where do you find tubes or valves and filter caps?
Yes, capacitors are available all over the place. In this country, we've got Radio Spares, another company called Farnell, and also China. I get quite a few capacitors from China. Valves or tubes, I have an attic absolutely full of them from years ago, decades ago. The thing is with valves, I think what a lot of people don't realize, because all my customers will say, oh, it's probably a valve. The truth is, it's very rarely a valve. Most of these radios I get on the bench, they've got the original valves in from the 1940s, and they don't need replacing. They're still going strong. So I did hear a story, and I believe it's true. Hundreds of thousands of valves were produced in the 40s, 50s, 60s, because they expected them to be replaced sort of every 5 minutes. Say the 40s and 50s. And they produced so many hundreds of thousands because they thought they were going to keep going wrong. And they didn't. And there are still very good stocks of new old stock valves from the 40s and 50s still around. I mean, some of them aren't cheap, but they're still around. The original Mullard valves are still there.
But filter caps, I can't imagine that filter caps made in the 40s are still either available, one or two that they haven't tried out. Are you one of these guys that will actually take the can and take the old cap out and put in a Chinese capacitor?
Yes, I'm with you on the filter caps. Yeah. No, what I do, I have said, one or two customers have said, I want it to look original inside and out. And I said, okay, I can saw off the bottom of the smoothing capacitor, take the innards out, fit all the new stuff in. If you want me to do that, it's time consuming and you've got to pay for it. So most people just say, no, just bung some Chinese ones underneath. When I say Chinese ones, I use Radio Spares. Well, they probably come from China anyway, but I'll use Radio Spares or Farnell for the smoothing capacitors, the filter capacitors. I have got quite a few original ones from the 40s, and I have reformed them. I built a little sort of reforming unit, and I have used them on occasion, and they're still very good. They haven't. When they're reformed, they seem to last, well, I don't know, for years. I've had some radios gone to customers where I've done this, and they've never come back to me. So they've either thrown the radio away or it's still working strong. So, yeah, but mainly, though, I do use the modern ones.
Well, so explain, Ray, what is capacitor reforming? What does that mean that you are reforming a capacitor?
Technically, I'm not too good at chemistry, but there's something in the capacitor that, it oxidizes or something. What you do is you apply HT to it, a voltage to it. You start off with a low voltage, increase it slowly, and the capacitor will, I'm not sure of the chemistry that happens inside, but it's what they call it reforms. Because sometimes, initially, if you connect a capacitor that's not been used, say it's 30, 40, 50 years old, it'll draw a lot of current. What you have to do is bring up the voltage slowly over many, many hours, and you have a series resistor, of course, watch the ammeter or the milliammeter, watch what's going on. And if you then get to the full work, say it's a 400 volt working capacitor, you get to the full 400 volts and then look at the current it's drawing, and it shouldn't be drawing any, it shouldn't be getting warm. And basically that's it. It's a long process, but I'll only do that if someone really wants the original one. I don't fit the modern ones in the old cans anymore. It's too time consuming.
What kind of impact has amateur radio had on your family life?
Yes. No one's interested. My son is heavily into computers. He works for some, I don't know what it is, data thing. He does these big data centers and things. He's not interested.
Well, he's actually in the business I'm in, and he has quite a name out there. And by that name happens to be the same as yours, right?
Oh, you know of him? Yes. That's right. I'm not sure what people say to me, what does your son do? I have to say, I'm sorry, I don't know.
Right, so he's an expert in VMware for people that if they look up Ray Heffer, they're going to find you or they're going to find your son.
That's right, yes. When he was young, my wife would call out Ray. We both say yes. I don't know why we named him the same as me. I don't know why we did that, but that's over 40 years ago.
It seemed like a good idea at the time.
It seemed like fun at the time, yes, and it's good fun. But
you mentioned in your website that your wife is very supportive of the work that you're doing and even helps you in the business there.
She does, yes. She's very supportive, especially just back to amateur radio for a minute, especially with my aerials. I've got wires, coax, and the feeders and stuff all going into the house across the landing, and I must admit I'm very naughty, hanging from the ceiling and across into what I call my radio room, and she puts up with it all. She doesn't mind. Sometimes if she trips over a wire in the garden, she will say, do we have to have this across the path? But she's excellent. And I just say, well, of course we do.
Yeah, of course. She sounds like a real keeper.
She is. She's brilliant. And she'll help me with the radios because a lot of them are posted to me. And posting them, I'm getting on a bit now. I'm, 68. And I've got my back hurts, my knee hurts. That's the usual sort of old age stuff. And she's quite a bit younger than me. So she'll pack up the radios for me in boxes, do all the packaging and the taping and everything. She really is a great help.
What do you think is the greatest challenge facing amateur radio now?
Oh, I can answer that straight away with no trouble. Noise. Funnily enough, I was listening to, you might find this odd, Shoreham Airport, a little airfield near us. They've got a non-directional beacon on 332 KCs, sorry, show my age, kilohertz, 332 kilohertz, sends out SHM for Shoreham in Morse. And I was listening to that, and I thought I was using one of these active, mini-whip active antennas. And that's the first time I've heard that beacon in years, because if I use an ordinary aerial on a communications receiver, on anywhere, shortwave, long wave, medium wave, all I get is noise. Dreadful noise. That's the main reason I've now gone to 10 meters, because on 10 with a 5/8 vertical aerial, I get very little. The S meter is barely reading S1, whereas the other bands, it can be, as I said, top band 20/9, 80 meters, not too bad. S8 constant solid noise, S8, but so noise is the biggest problem. I think that's the biggest challenge. And I just feel so sorry for people because you're coming into the hobby, they're going to tune around 80 meters, think, what is this noise? But just going back to the airport, I was reading Civil Aviation Authority or whatever they are here. They were complaining, or they have complained, because our telephone wires, a lot of them are in the street from poles down to the houses. They carry ADSL.
Right.
For broadband. And the Aviation Authority are complaining because they're obviously telephone lines act as huge aerials, very efficient aerials, and they're knocking out these beacons, which aircraft use for, obviously direction finding or whatever. So, yes, I'm hoping that this ADSL problem, which I'm sure is what I've got here, because over the front of our front driveway, there are 5 telephone lines running across our drive through my airspace. So I'm not allowed to cut them down, apparently. But that is the biggest challenge, I'd say, these days. It's noise.
But as we spoke yesterday, I think you mentioned it, I also have a problem here with noise, that I'm going to build a magnetic loop receive antenna.
Right.
So that's one of the ways that I think I'm going to try to beat the noise.
Right.
So maybe.
Yeah, that's interesting. I've never tried that. What I have done is I built a medium wave loop, or sort of AM loop, which is about, I built quite a big one, actually, about 6 foot across. It's just a loop aerial with a coupling coil and a variable capacitor, then into the old vintage valve radio that I was trying to think for my customers, what sort of aerial can I perhaps supply? I mean, obviously not the 6 foot one, but that was very good. It did bring down the noise. Obviously, it's very directional, and it's a huge thing. But that's one way of bringing down the noise.
Didn't those old radios, we're going back to the 1940s radios, didn't they have a loop antennas in the back where they used to spin the wire on the back cover?
Yes, many of them did, or a loop thing inside, or a frame around inside the cabinet. Many of them did, and they aren't too bad. But a lot of them, I think the majority of them, just have an aerial socket on the back, and you've got to put a piece of wire in there, 20, 30 feet long. And of course, as soon as you do that, you pick up all the interference. It's a major problem, actually, noise. It's interesting to hear that you've got noise problems where you are, because I've only ever sort of known it in the UK, but it is a major problem. Everything these days, from your washing machine, even your toaster to make your toast in the morning, it's got a microprocessor in it, pumping out a load of hash, Wi-Fi, so everything. I wish you could see RF. We'd be drowning in RF. And just briefly, going on to 70 centimeters, that band, I've got a couple of these Bofang, these cheap little Chinese rigs, handheld things. I mean, they're brilliant. They work extremely well. But I've just put up a 70 centimeters 10-element beam. And I thought, I'll try the Bofang on that. It won't receive anything. There's so much strong out-of-band RF around where I am, and the Bofang is so wide in its front end that it just blocks it. The receiver just dies. So
yeah, it's pretty amazing that they're an ideal radio for if you have a little node or something in your house. Are you doing DMR at all?
No, I'm not. I've just got these. I got them from a friend of mine, actually. I just use them on the local repeater.
Yeah, I've discovered they're great for working with my node around the house. But if I take him to a radio site, I was on a radio site the other day, and they don't hear anything. They don't even hear the transmitter on the site.
No, that's it.
They're gone.
That's right. Yeah, so we've got so much around here. There's all sorts of telemetry or whatever. I mean, just down the road from me is a sign. It says car parking spaces. That's in the multi-story car park in town, and it'll say 75 free. And there's on top of that is a little UHF 3-element aerial pointing to the town. Now that's picking up a load of data or whatever. And I walked past it the other day with the Bofang, and it's just wiped out totally. There's so much RF around these days. It's the fault of the Bofang, obviously. It's not the transmitter, but it just shows how much RF there is floating around these days.
But we're not criticizing the Bofang. I actually own a couple of them. I find that they're ideal radios to use while walking the dog.
Yes.
Because I took a $300 radio out to walk the dog and ended up dropping it and shredding the inside. So a $25 Bofang is an ideal dog walking radio.
Yes. Yeah.
So that's how I think about it. What about what excites you the most about what's happening in amateur radio now?
That's a good question. I don't know. I suppose, to be honest, Eric, nothing. What excites me the most is getting back into CW, getting back onto possibly one day top band and 80 meters, if ever that becomes possible. I don't know. What excites me? I don't know. I suppose the whole thing about, I used to tune around shortwave a lot and hear all these things, as I've said, but these days there's not much to listen to. I know it might sound dreadful, but I don't think there is anything, for me anyway, at my age, I don't think there is anything exciting, to be honest.
Well, I think getting back into CW is actually quite admirable.
Yeah,
I've had some great interviews with people who are doing just that, or they're teaching it, or they're organizing their communities to improve their CW skills. It's the first digital mode, so we can go out and we can promote CW as a digital mode, the first digital mode, and
yes.
I think that's pretty exciting that you're getting back into CW. I'd like to do the same thing.
I suppose that is actually, yes. I say that when I say that, it doesn't excite me. I don't like these digital modes. I don't like what is it? Several of our repeaters have gone. Is it D Star?
DMR, D Star.
Yeah, all that. I don't like all that. To be honest, it's all too expensive as well. In the early days, you get an old PMR rig. You'd get it going on 2 meters. If it needed was it 1750? Was it, or 20 tone to open the repeater? You could fit that yourself. It was great fun. Then they went over to continuous tone, squelch, CTC, SS. So the old PMR rigs wouldn't do that. Then they go digital, so or any radios you've got won't work. And I don't know. I like the way it was. We've still got a good few repeaters here on 2 meters and 77s. I have to say, they're very good repeaters, and I do use most of them a lot of the time.
What advice would you give to new or returning hams?
First of all, I would say try and use Morse code if you can. I'd say go to 10 meters, because as I said, on there you've got so much choice. It's a big band, 10 meters. There's plenty of room for everyone. You can be having a local chat. I don't know whether I mentioned this. Years ago, I was chatting to a chap locally on 10 meters, and a chap joined in from Port Elizabeth, South Africa. That's about 6,000 miles away. And we were all 5 and 9. It was fantastic. So I would say to newcomers, get onto 10 meters. You haven't got to worry about loads of aerials. Just get one, a CB aerial, adjusted for 10 meters. What are they, about 18 feet long? Mine, that's what I've got. I've got it on a 6-foot fence post, just a fence post at the end of the garden. It's only 6 feet above the ground, the base of it. And I've worked Australia, South Africa, Indonesia, the American repeaters. So I think if any newcomers come along and they want to get on HF, I'd start on 10 meters. Worry about big wire aerials for top band and that later on. But get on to 10 meters first.
Well, that sounds like a great idea. It may be something I'm going to turn around here in a minute and turn the rig on and see whether I hear anything on 10 meters. But that sounds like great advice. Ray, it's been a real pleasure to talk to you about old radios. Your website is amazing. I'll put links to that in the show notes page. Your YouTube channel, I'll also put links to that in the show notes page so that people can see all of the videos that you've made. Right. And with that, Ray, I want to thank you so much for joining me on the QSO Today podcast and wish you 73.
Yes, and 7-3 from me in the UK. It's been great. G4NSJ signing off.
That concludes this episode of QSO Today. I hope that you enjoyed this QSO with Ray. Please be sure to check out the show notes that include links and information about the topics that we discussed. Go to www.qsotoday.com and put in G4NSJ in the search box at the top of the page. My thanks to both ICOM America and QRP Labs for their support of the QSO Today podcast. Please show your support of these fine sponsors by clicking on their links in the show notes pages, or when you make your purchases, that you say that you heard it here on QSO Today. You may notice that some of the episodes are transcribed into written text. If you'd like to sponsor this or any of the other episodes into written text, please contact me. Support the QSO Today podcast by first joining the QSO Today email list by pressing the subscribe buttons on the show notes pages. I will not spam you or share your email address with anyone. Become a listener sponsor monthly or annually by clicking on the sponsor buttons on the show notes page. I am grateful for any way that you show appreciation and support. It makes a big difference. QSO Today is now available on iHeartRadio, Spotify, Libsyn, and TuneIn, as well as the iTunes Store. If you own an Amazon Echo, you can say, Alicia, play the QSO Today podcast from TuneIn. I still use Stitcher to listen to podcasts on my smartphone. The links to all of these services are on the show notes pages on the right side. Until next time, this is Eric for Z1UG 73. The QSO Today podcast is a product of KEG Media Inc., who is solely responsible for its content.